What's good, people? Damn, this newborn parenting life is something special. I'm easily ranking it up there with some of the hardest things I've ever had to do, right? I've done SEAL Fit / Navy SEAL Hell Week type of things over a weekend, sleep deprived for like 24 hours. I've done marathons, Spartan races, Tough Mudders. I've crunched on a project and sacrificed my personal life for what felt like a year or more. Definitely been in emotionally taxing relationships and things like this. And this is up there. This takes the cake for sure. I didn't think I'd ever get this episode out. At some point, the nights blurred together, and without proper REM or deep sleep, these moments don't get a chance to save from my RAM to my hard drive in my head. All the time I usually have to work on a podcast is typically spent with my baby boy or catching up on sleep or, helping Catherine with something. Add the fact that I'm trying to bank my paternity leave for the end of Catherine's maternity when she's back at work. So hopefully she can stretch out her leave, then take advantage of Washington State's FMLA, stretch that out to the end of the year so that by the time I'm spending all the time with him, he'll be around 5 or 6 months old, and it should be the time together where it'll be more worthwhile, right? He'll be a bit more developed and cognizant of things we're doing together. Right now, honestly, I'm just in survival mode, right? Trying to keep my household alive and functioning and from turning into like a pigsty. The epic summer break was fantastic, and then I took an extra week off. That's when my boy was born, and now I'm back at work, and that's been challenging. The team has been super accommodating for the hours that I'm putting in and being flexible with them, and I kind of cherish it and value having something to go to outside of speaking baby and household day in and day out. I think it helps with the balance, right? But still, like anything, a balancing act. Huge thank you and appreciation and love to everybody with their loving messages, congratulating me and offering parental insight, resources, books, tips, and even sending clothing and toys. Super appreciative of that. So, episode 38 is officially 1 week late, which makes 2 back-to-back late episodes, both taking 3 weeks instead of the usual 2. So while I'm adapting to my new perma-change life as a dad, I'm still looking to see how to fit in the podcast editing, but I'm here to promise you this show will keep going. I've got way too many guests that have been nominated, plus people who have committed to me or told me that they wanted to come on. So at the very minimum, I'll at least get those episodes done before throwing in the towel. Word is bond. We don't quit around these parts. So now, with all of that out of the way, let's get it. On episode 38 of the Game Developers Podcast, Out of Play Area, we sit down with Claude Jerome, a lead gameplay designer for Firewalk Studios. They're part of the Probably Monsters umbrella operating out of Bellevue, Washington. If you haven't heard of them, Firewalk Studios and Probably Monsters. So reading a little bit about them from their website, it's a new category of game company that builds sustainable game studios through a people-first culture. Firewalk Studios is a AAA studio focused on delivering world-class multiplayer experiences, and they've entered into an agreement with Sony Interactive Entertainment as the exclusive publishing partner for its inaugural multiplayer game. Firewalk was founded in 2018, led by Tony Hsu, studio head of NGM and SVP of Destiny at Activision, Ryan Ellis, game director, previously creative director at Bungie, Elena Siegman, executive producer, previously at Harmonix, Irrational Bungie. So it seems to be a bunch of ex-Bungie people with a lot of experience in all those FPSs and huge worlds. Claude himself has been all over, from Destiny at Bungie, Project Spark at Microsoft, worked at First Playable, Vicarious Visions, he's worked on Skylanders. Who knows, he may have overlapped with Chris Cole from episode 37 when he worked at those two studios. I connected with Claude Jerome from Game Devs of Color, and so please welcome, representing New Jerusalem, aka New Jersey, proudly representing his Haitian American heritage into game dev. Please welcome Claude Jerome. Previously recorded on June the 28th. Let's fall the fuck out.
Bienvenue. Welcome to the Out of Play Area podcast, a show by video game devs for game devs, where the guests open up one-on-one about their journey, their experiences, their views, and their ideas. No ads, no bullshit. Join us as we venture far out of the play area with your host, seasoned game designer John Diaz.
I saw screenshots of 343's like Halo Forge thing that they got going on, and so that just visual
Yep,
scripting. But
UGC, man, there's a lot of power.
this is it, man.
Yeah.
Core is the thing.
My buddy went over there. He was our lead designer. He went over there as a big exec dude.
That might be the next
We'll see.
step.
It always
bro.
feels like it.
Like I see all my buddies moving up to like principal and director, and I'm like, yeah. But then I say this now, right? I don't want to get into that position where I'm all hands off.
Yep, same here, man. Same here. It's always a delicate dance. Trying to find the right balance of I want to bring my experience to the table and shape what we're doing, but yeah, also want to make stuff.
Because you're in your leadership now.
Yep. It's the highest level I've been in.
Is it hybrid management where you're like managing and ICing, or is it strictly management?
Yeah, at Bungie is something similar. Bungie, I was a lead gameplay abilities designer, and now I'm a lead gameplay designer. So thinking more about the whole, right? Not just the characters and what they can do, but just like the whole gameplay sandbox. That's definitely taking up more of that like leadership management kind of time. But I still get to do hands-on stuff actually to kind of figure out like the core feel and figure out some of these big relationships and like the really, really core tuning. So yeah.
So does that tend to come when it's kind of unknown territory, right? It's just like you need to get the machete and go trailblaze a path before being able to lay a groundwork or lay a framework or direction?
A little bit, right? Like it's, we're working on something from the ground up, never built before, a new team, everybody's coming with different experiences. We're trying to find our space in between other games of our genre, right? And so like there is some unknown territory, and so like the leads tackle that from different perspectives. Gameplay is thinking about like, okay, what are going to be the tenets of our gameplay that set us aside, but also what are the tenets that are like the rock solid foundation that everybody kind of comes to expect from the genre. And that's the same thing. Art's looking at it from their lens of like, how do we make something that feels different than they've ever seen before? So everybody's trying to find that space.
Yeah.
And then also in the way that unifies the whole project, like a Voltron kind of thing, right?
Yeah, Voltron. Love that analogy.
Yeah, you can't just like find an art style that no one's done before if it doesn't make sense for everything else, right? Everything has to be in alignment, like sort of up and down the project. So that's hard, super hard. And that's where, if the job comes out of in the weeds doing stuff and it's a lot of talking to people and it's a lot of like vision management, like trying to like help everybody see the same picture. And that takes literal years.
Literal years. Thank you for calling that out, Claude, because I don't think enough people stepping into this type of role realize that, right? They think it's just like a one and done, or whenever new people join the team, hey, just go read the wiki or whatever. But like, it's a never ending job. And I'm bad with this, right? Like I struggle with repetition. And I think you need to just make it a part of your like daily routine, right? Repeat the things you said Monday, that you said last month, that you said last year, that you said last summer, kind of thing. It never loses value.
What's interesting with that, it's super on it. Like, that's where pillars come in, right? Like having like things that the team can put on a board or virtually in a doc or whatever, or like pin it to Slack or something, where everybody can see it and talk about it at the same time. But like, you also need to be able to let go of those things as you discover what works, what doesn't work, right? And that's been another big part of this journey of doing it from scratch. It's like figuring out what we want sometimes is different than what we thought it was, and adapting the product design as a whole to things that we discovered in like the minute to minute or like the flow of the game or what people are resonating with, right? And so you got to adapt, right? And like it's hard to do that with it, especially like we're getting used to working remote, so learning how to communicate that way has been really challenging.
Have you learned anything juicy over the pandemic and having to transition to this kind of remote work life?
Yeah, I mean, personally, my journey is pandemic. Everybody's got a journey, I guess. Now it's like, I thought I was gonna hate it for a long time. Like, I had a toddler at home, so it was really hard. Before she was in daycare, it was really hard. It's like in and out, hard to figure out how to focus, how to get time at my desk, and all that kind of stuff.
You were already a parent before the pandemic.
Yeah, and so trying to figure out how to do that and work and being able to contribute while all that's happening, but also being able to be a good father, right? Like trying to do this, right? That's a big deal. But as she went to daycare, as we got kind of settled into communication patterns and tools and stuff, and I got my desk really kind of set up, and I started to feel more comfortable. I like it. Like I get to focus a little bit more when I'm really in those like hard problems. And in terms of like how we've adapted as a whole, like what kind of juicy secrets we've learned, I think the one piece that stands out to me the most is we get to hire more broadly, which is great. So we get to hire people in different states, different people, in some different countries and stuff. We have to figure out logistically how that works, I think, but like Yeah,
you're not limited in the talent that you
exactly.
can go after now.
Yep, it's amazing. So it lessens the ability to make that excuse of like, oh, the pool's small. If people don't want to move out to Seattle or whatever, right? It's like,
Hmm.
nope, we got a bigger pool now.
Talent is not so limited, or the
Hmm.
merry-go-round or the musical chairs in this city, as
Yeah,
crazy as that
the
was.
merry-go-round, so real,
Yeah.
so real. Yeah, yeah. So we get to break that up, and it gives us an extra edge on diversity, right? Like when we're trying to hire more diverse
Fuck yeah.
candidates, like a lot of people, like I went out to Game Devs of Color a few years ago, multiple times back in New York, and it was the most diverse group of the game devs I've ever seen. But a
Dude.
lot of them don't really feel like they want to move out of the area for a bunch of good, valid reasons.
Hmm.
And so this is, a good way again opening a door and saying like, you don't have to. Like Seattle's not for everybody.
Totally. Yeah. Especially if you're a Northeaster or East
Hmm.
Coaster.
Yep.
Absolutely. Right. There's a
Hmm.
different vibe, different culture. It's cool not to have to uproot and acclimate.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
What do they call it, man? Like the freeze or the passive aggressiveness or
Yeah,
whatever.
the Seattle free. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. No, and
Hmm.
I think like that's a big part of your ability to grow and do your work well is being comfortable. And so if you're in that space, you're like maybe you're near your family, or maybe you just like like the area. You have someone bought a house or something, or they like the puppies and just want to be home with them. Like all that kind of stuff. Like just contributes to the comfort that allows you to then do your best work, right? So
Heck yeah. Yo, speaking of Game Does the Color, that was awesome. That's where I connected with you, I believe,
yep.
right? It was like the 2021, speaking of
Yeah.
pandemic life and
Yep.
whatnot.
Over the
And
internet. Yeah.
over the fucking internet, you're like, yo,
Yeah.
dude, like what you about? Let's talk, let's chat. And I'm like,
It's
yo, I
true.
love your shit, bro. Like you did one of my favorite presentations that year, really talking about Destiny game feel, right? Like I don't know
Hmm.
if it was, making a grenade or just making
Yeah. All that kind of
weapons.
stuff. Yeah.
Dude, it was
Yeah.
awesome. I was super jealous after I saw yours because it was like you had so much tangible game examples. And,
Hmm.
the topic of the talk, you would be shooting yourself in the foot if you didn't set it up that way. But
Hmm.
I was like, damn, man, I wish I had more gifts and
Yeah.
more examples. Yeah,
Yeah.
for
I
sure.
appreciate that, man. It was a ton more work than I thought it was going to be. I enjoyed every second of it, though. It was like, except for the seconds leading up to it, I was really nervous. But,
Ah,
but like in terms of piecing it together, like it was helping me like crystallize some of the stuff that I learned working on that stuff. Like explaining something sometimes is a good way of teaching it to yourself, right? Like you're kind of
100%.
thinking about how you're going to translate the things that are in your head, and sometimes that makes you like sort of crystallize the way you think about it a little differently. Like a lot of growth came from that. And yeah, I remember when I was in college, like thinking about game design like for the first time and stuff. Like I was able to look at some PDC talks that got into detail, like Jamie Griesenberg's talks from his Halo days. He had a series called Design in Detail, and he got
Okay.
really in the weeds about how they balance weapons, about how they built stuff. And I remember looking at that as someone who barely has made a game before and just thinking about like all the stuff that I had thought about. It's like opening my mind up, and it was because it was in the weeds. And so I'm always
Yeah.
inspired by talks like that or websites like that, like blogs or Twitter posts or whatever, where it's like, this is exactly why we set up the way this enemy rotates every frame or whatever, right? Like just like little
Yeah.
things, because big impacts on little things add up to making the whole game feel totally different.
Say that again. It's like big things add up.
It's like like a Destiny we talked about it as like 1,000 cuts, to make something really good. Like if you keep making little adjustments here and there, like it add up. Like you don't really notice each individual adjustment. And so the
Okay.
way I think about it is like you can make a really big impact on a small thing, and if you do that enough, the whole product starts to feel different in a way people can't even like describe it. They're just like it just feels different. And that's what
Word.
like a lot of that game feel talk was based on stuff like how the grenade bounces when you hit it at different things, or like some of the
Yeah.
performance that like helps communicate what it's going to be there, or how the enemies react to the performance before, after, during, all that kind of stuff. Just little things here and there. Just all add up.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And it's totally different ends of the spectrum, right? There's people that are more macros, people that are more
Hmm.
micro.
Yep.
Where would you classify yourself? I would say, listen to your talk. I would have put you more
Hmm.
micro, but I think over the past few years, I wonder if where do you classify yourself on that
Yeah.
spectrum?
I would say definitely I'm more on the micro side. I mean, as I grow, I'm thinking more of the macro.
Thinking word.
Yeah, like I think a lot about how like at the micro level, I'm affecting things at the macro level. And the things that I tend to think about at the macro level are, I work on like competitive games a lot. And as a gamer, I play a lot of like fighting games and stuff. And so I think a lot about the back and forth between people. And so to
Yeah.
me, the focus on micro, the focus on like frame data or like, acceleration, returning, whatever, like all that stuff communicates your intent. And then when your opponent can see your intent, they're reacting to your intent and they're giving your intent. And so there's this back and forth that's like effectively a conversation. So like at the macro level of a fighting game or a shooter or whatever, people are having conversation with each other. They're like learning about each other. Like, okay, you move left and right. You're jumping this way. You're gonna come around the corner this way. You're gonna crouch. You're gonna do your charge moves when I do this. And you're literally learning about each other and reacting to that. And that's like in a lot of ways, like, yeah, for myself, and I know a lot of other gamers like super introverted. That's the way we talk to people too. Like it's
Word.
like it's you know. So I think a lot about like the story at the macro level, the way people talk to each other, way, like, you know, how are we setting up that expression to be deep enough that like you yourself come across in the way you make choices in the game. So I think about both. Like I position myself as a micro designer, but I am thinking about the like big picture still.
It really resonates, and it hits a point with me thinking about how back in the day, even today, right? Like no words are being exchanged. Maybe nowadays people are more vocal because I don't know, they're streaming or we got to talk over headsets.
Sure.
But back in the day, like couch co-op or side by side at arcades or whatever, no words were said.
Yeah.
But like you said, a ton of words being said through the expression and the controls and the gameplay.
Yeah. And it didn't even take like, you know, getting to the level of like fidelity that we have now with games, right? Like one genre that I love still that I talk to my buddies about, he works on like God of War and stuff, is the beat 'em up genre, like the side scrolling beat 'em ups, right? Like those are super simple. They're kind of coming back right now with like, yeah, new TMNT.
Shredder's Revenge.
Revenge is so good. And like I remember him telling me about like, yeah, because we worked on a game like that in college and we talked about like the big brother, little brother experience. And I had that when I was growing up, playing with my older brother in those kind of games. And like, again, like, you know, we're different ages, thinking about things differently. But when we're playing that game, we're communicating about everything, like who's going where, who's doing what, like who tends to be the guy who beats up these guys, who tends to be the guy who eats the pizza when he has full health, you know what I mean? Like all these little things. Like, yeah. And so you get to know each other, even though you're just sitting down and playing a game, not talking to each other. Like you're actually talking to each other. It's like, and so there's something magical about that comes from the mechanics that I still love, think about. But yeah, I can talk about that forever though.
Hey man, I think that's okay. We kind of ventured this entire episode into that realm. Nobody will be mad at that for sure.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Taking a step back, we're talking about academics, where you came up. What have you found navigating your career, Claude? I know our ancestors or family members are island mates. You know, the island of Hispaniola. I'm on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast.
That's right.
And I honestly can't tell you that I know another Dominican that I've worked alongside of on the team. Maybe, across sister studios or something, but I couldn't tell you that I, shipped a game with another Dominican person on the team in the trenches, right? I'm curious how your experience has been.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't think I've ever met someone who is Haitian who makes video games. I actually, I guess Reggie Phillip.
If a mate.
I don't know him, right? So I guess it's man.
He's in the game. He's like more cool biz dev, I guess.
But yeah, like it's rare, man. Like it's crazy. Like even just people of color in our jobs and stuff. Like at Max, I work with maybe like 3 or 4 other Black game devs at the same studio, like ever. That's like I was at Bungie. I guess we had a little bit more than that, but it was like we had at the time I had like 700 people and like still probably a single digit number of folks that look like me. So pretty nuts. Like it's rare. It's hard being tokenized in that sense too. It's hard both externally and internally. Just like being in that position, thinking about what people are thinking about, the expectations that come with that. Like you said, our journey isn't easy either. And so we got a lot that's riding on it, right?
Yeah, man. I know for myself, I just kind of put the blinders on, right? I was just like, hey, going through my program, right? When I was doing engineering comp sci, I already kind of saw the same vibe, It was only so many that kind of made it through or were interested in that field for whatever reason that I think we're doing much better at now, right? Just awareness and programs. Then I felt like I actually grew being around very different culture and speaking and music and all and food, right? Like I was like, oh, this is awesome. But I felt like the reverse is also true. Like I never got to really kind of share what I was about and kind of put that forward on a team in like Austin, Texas or San Diego, California or whatever.
Yeah. But I have a similar feeling, man. I feel like like you come from a place that is your own, and no one else can totally know that unless they're in that sort of experience. So, being a Haitian American, like even like just growing up, I didn't even think about my Haitian heritage that much because I was trying to assimilate with sort of like what Black American culture was like, what my friends were like, and then in college, trying to get into like the tech places and stuff, like there's even less of people that look like me. And so I could barely even sort of, find out who I was before I was putting all that energy towards like that assimilation kind of feel.
Yeah.
And so now, I'm growing up, like I'm trying to grow into like figuring out more of what I said earlier, even honestly, like how to put myself into the game, like how do I put myself into my work, the people around me and stuff. And so I'm trying to embrace more of like all that as I grow up and stuff, especially, thinking about my kids, like I want them to like be who they are and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like I think it's just a lot of pressure to fit in, and like, you come into this environment that feels like everything's already kind of has momentum. And so you just kind of want to like, figure out how you slot into that as opposed to thinking about expressing yourself and bringing it all to the table. Because it feels honestly a lot of times disruptive in a way that's dangerous. Like it shouldn't feel disruptive, but it is.
It shouldn't.
Yeah. It's like,
Agreed.
if you're in a meeting and we're talking about, some character representation, or not even representation, just like a character, and you want to bring up something about representation, like if and the momentum's already going in the direction of what's normal, right? Like they're just talking about grizzly white dude holding a gun, and you want to like talk about a little bit something different, like you're automatically disrupting. It's a good thing to disrupting, but it feels bad because you're the only one, right? And so it puts that like sort of that pressure on you. That's why I said like externally and internally. And so, for my own growth, it's been trying to let go of some of that internal pressure to just say like, you know what, fuck it, I'm here. This is who I am. If you don't like that, that's your problem. That's not my problem.
Yeah, dude. I like that. I like that, right? Like just making it a thing, bringing it up to the surface where it's like, I can empathize, right? I've been in those, what it feels like to be in a meeting where, we've been blocked for so long, we're finally reaching consensus and everybody's rocking. The type of person I am would hate to kind of, hold on, man, let's check out this off ramp, but pump the brakes. We haven't even kind of explored other avenues. Like, yeah, this is awesome, but what if we kind of apply some other things, like and ask,
let's bring different music into the picture, or whatever. Yeah, like,
bro,
it just feels, and if you're the only one, it feels weird. It feels like,
it feels weird.
And suddenly you're responsible for and explaining what that is, even, right? And so like you can't even, what the depth of that cultural pieces are, right? And so you don't want to misrepresent that either. So nobody wants to be one person representing anything.
Tough, right? Yeah, going back to like being able to bring more people into the fold, right? To help offload that weight, right? It is a weight, and also like to push each other to bite the bullet for the sake of being the only people present in the room that can speak to it, right? And I'd be curious to see how other people have arrived at that. But
yeah.
It is awesome, the seldom opportunities that do arise where some teammate takes the time to question, or some producer, it's like, hey, let's table it here. Let's pause this. Let's think about this. Let's come back to it. Let's explore this brainstorm.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it too as like, I look at it with the like social progress lens in general of like someone's always sacrificing and having a harder time than the person that's subsequent from them. And that's just that's progress, right? It's like you're gonna have a hard time so that someone else has an easier time. And so I think about like, like you said, I had a horse blinders kind of perspective as well of just like trying to get my work done, trying to be the best I can be, so my work speaks for itself and no one's questioning my identity or where I'm coming from or anything like that. Like if I have the best work, that's the best work, period. And so I spent that kind of effort on everything such that it got me to the position I am in, where I'm more of a leadership position. I have more impact and influence of what we're making, and I'm just there. So like someone who's like looking at, like, I always try to get as many opportunities as I can to like be present as a leader in the game industry so that someone can see me and say like that is possible, right? Because I didn't do that. Like I saw pretty uniform view of what a lead looks like.
Indeed.
So
that's huge, bro. That's why I love that you coming onto the show, being able to feature you, right? Being able to say, look at what the leadership looks like these days.
It's possible.
Right?
We can do it.
It's possible, baby. It's possible.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So talk to me about where you are today. You are in Seattle. You're in Bellevue. Where are you and where are you working at?
Yeah. So Seattle, greater Seattle area. I'm living up in Kirkland right now. Weirdly, I've been here for 10 years now, but I still think about, I still think about, I'm from Jersey. So I don't really, every time someone asks, I'm like, I'm from Jersey, but I've been here for like 10 years. So it's pretty weird. But yeah, now I'm at Probably Monsters. which is, a family of studios. And so within Probably Monsters, I'm at Firewalk Studios making stuff happen. Been here for about 3 years since the very beginning, not super very beginning, like since really early Firewalk, like, and really early Probably Monsters, like sub 30 employees, like
Wow.
pretty small.
Ground floor, man.
Yeah, which is really cool to be part of. Like, working at Bungie was really cool. Being part of a legacy was really cool. But being able to start a legacy, that felt like something I would have to do at some point, right? And so I was really
That's
excited
Destiny,
about that.
right? When you talk about legacy, you talk about the Destiny
Yeah,
legacy.
exactly. Like
and then,
being at Bungie working on Destiny, which is like, a spiritual sort of connection to Halo and their roots and everything. And I loved Halo growing up. Like I played,
oh God, me too.
played all the
man.
games, read all the books, like hundreds of hours. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It's Halo 2. And so just being able to be part of that legacy was amazing and learn from that. But I like having an opportunity to do that from scratch, also amazing.
Yeah.
So really excited about that. Yeah.
What was it like? Was it like people just at Bungie were kind of talking about this in secret in secret meetings, and then it's like, all right, we're doing this and we're jumping, and we all jumped at the same time, or it was just kind of like
a little bit like everyone's, everyone had different reasons for going. Like I'll be honest and say, like, working on Destiny was a roller coaster, and to put it lightly. Like,
is this
making
Destiny
a game.
1 or Destiny 2?
Both. I started on Taken King for Destiny 1, which was like one of the bigger expansions. And trying to figure out how to support a big ass game with a super high quality bar, with a really hungry, user base that just is constantly looking for something new. And we didn't like the way we innovated on what people were looking forward to, like, subsequent releases and stuff was never like we never wanted to make it purely like expected, statistical outcomes, like, oh, you got a plus 100 this release, or like we changed the color from green to blue or whatever, right? Like we wanted to like try to make things you could hold and play with your hands that like felt like they had personality, that felt like they were completely different things that you could think of. And so it's always this like heavy creative burden to make the next thing. And like it never stops, right? It's like you're making the next thing, it's out, but before it's out, you're already on the next thing, and so you gotta be thinking about the next thing before you're making this current. Like it's crazy. So it's
live games.
There's a lot.
Man.
Live games are super hard, and Bungie was doing it for the first time in a really ambitious way. And it took several iterations of that game to figure out a good rhythm. And people, didn't all stick around for the ride, myself included. Like I stuck around for a while. I was there for 4 years, but it just took a toll. So I felt like I needed some space to like do my own, do something on my own that like felt like I could let go of some of the like the negativity that built up with me. And so
nice
some
to
other
reset, man, and start fresh.
Yeah, and that was right before I was about to have my first kid, and so I was really thinking about my whole self. Like what do I want? And this opportunity presents itself, so that was great. Like, Probably Monsters was started by former Bungie people as well in a lot of ways, and so I knew some of them, and so I could kind of talk about things. And I was looking at some other opportunities too, but that one really stuck out to me because it was like people I knew that I could trust their sense of values and sensibilities, and kind of feel like I was part of something that I knew a little bit too, so it wasn't a full risk. So yeah, jumped over, tried that out. Amazing. Immediately. Like, going from a 700 person team to like, we had like on Firewalk, some like 15, 16 people. So it was just tight. We were just moving fast, like just trying stuff out. It was really cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Had you ever had that before in your career? That small, tight, super high velocity, super agile environment?
Yeah, a little bit, but never with that quality bar, right? Like, 'cause I worked on like small teams, in college, and small games when I was in my, my first job was a place that made Nintendo DS games for kids, and so like, I actually thought our quality bar is high for what we were building for kids, but like in terms of like AAA,
first Playable.
First Playable, amazing experience, a bunch of reasons. And like I said, like I think what we were making because we play test with kids, so we kind of knew like the impact it had on them and stuff. And so, I think about that, but like as like a positive thing. But when I think about the like sort of quality bar, quote unquote, of a AAA, big thing, like big flagship kind of product, like I never had a small team with that ambition. And so it's interesting to have a little bit of both, right? It's like, how do we get there with the smallish team? Like, a team's much bigger than 15 now, but
yeah.
So
Ma-
yeah, this is interesting, and it was good to like flex those skills again, right? Like going from a big studio with a pipeline that's already kind of set up to like
Mhm.
starting from scratch, learning a new engine, learning how to like set up you know pipelines and stuff for the stuff we're going to build, like writing specs for systems that didn't exist yet, as opposed to like specs for extensions on systems. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
Dude, I'm hyped to finally have someone from Probably Monsters on the show because I the little bit I understood of how it's set up was super interesting, and I don't
Mhm.
know if any other place is set up the same, right? Is
yeah.
it kind of
There's
like
It's pretty unique. I think there's like there's one more in California that I forget the name of that's sort of similar. But yeah, like the way we're set up is really interesting. It's probably Monsters is like I said, it's like a family of studios. And so
okay?
the structure of it, the core of it is supportive of all the studios. And so I like to think about the metaphor as like the NBA, where like the NBA is an organization that has teams which have their own
Mhm.
individual management, franchises like culture, even players, obviously, and they get to operate all individually on their own, but they're all
Mhm.
part of this big umbrella. And so it's kind of Probably Monsters is where the benefit of that is that the structure that you always need for any studio, like HR, system, like back end systems, literally desks, like getting space, it's all, insurance, all the stuff that you're gonna need for the sort of people oriented
Yeah, the
aspect of
people
game
part.
development. Yeah, that's like kind of set up already. So the studios can basically focus on their creative ambitions, how they're gonna set up their culture, how their teams are gonna work, right? And so it just gets you immediately going on what you
Damn.
want to build as opposed to like sort of the overhead, right?
With a nice safety net, I imagine. So you have the HR, I guess you have like IT resources, like,
Yep, yep,
getting your computer set up, network
yep,
issues,
yep.
um, I guess source control management,
Yeah, like they
file
help us with all that stuff.
storage.
Like it's
That's
pretty
nice.
amazing. Like because again, it helps you feel smaller in the sense that you get to focus on the thing you want, and the people that you're talking to on a day to day basis are all focused on that. But once you need the help for structural changes or whatever, that's already being handled by someone else who's just focused on that. So it's pretty nice, right? And as the studio, as each as we get more studios built in, then our overall structure grows, our overall capacity grows, our overall capabilities grow, right? Like
Mhm, mhm.
insurance
Yeah.
gets better, structures get better, like we get, all this kind of stuff gets better for everybody. It's pretty
Do
cool.
y do you so then you have the individual studios under the Probably Monsters Association.
Hmm.
Then do you guys get to collaborate or share resources or assets, or is it really kind of essentially thinking about it like completely individual studios, but
Yeah,
you share that shared pool of resources up one layer?
it's a little unclear still. It's
Okay.
it's developing. I think there's some of that, right? Like as the entire association, we get all hands, or we get to hang out or like talk about the future of a company. We used to have like some design syncs even across studios.
That's
That
really
gets
cool. I like hearing
Yeah,
about
it's
that stuff.
hard because
Sure.
each studio, like I said, is
Schedules are different,
independent.
right?
Well, for sure on the logistical side, but even on the like legal side, right? Like each studio is individual in the sense of being able to sign up with different publishers and have a different,
Okay.
projects that different, even hardware or whatever, right? And so like there's some sense of security there that the like partners will want to know about of like, hey, like this
Sure.
can't get out, whatever, right? And so
Yep.
there's some walls for sure. And I think we're trying to still evolve, like, where those walls stop us, where don't they? Like, how much can we share tech? How much can we share knowledge about,
Yeah.
when different teams are working on Unreal or whatever? Like, how much can we say, like, hey, don't do that?
Yeah, yeah, warn them, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm curious, what's the stake of ownership from the
Hmm.
studio level to the Probably Monsters level, and do you have access to each other via Slack? Do you have
Yeah.
all this?
Yeah.
All right, that's all
Yeah.
right.
We
So
can
that
talk.
that
Like,
does feel more.
yeah, like we have like a shared network to be able to talk and stuff, and
Mhm.
we have a shared building. So once we're you know occupying that and stuff, like second floor has X studio, third floor has whatever studio. So like we're around each other, so it is connected feeling, but
Mhm.
there's just some areas that are of gray of like, yeah, like don't touch that. But like we can talk about like, hey, I tried doing this in Unreal's localization system or whatever. So like I learned this
Yeah,
lessons, stuff
'cause
like
that's
that.
public knowledge, right?
Yeah, just kind of we're devs in the same room trying to make
Mhm.
stuff. So
Water cooler
yeah, yeah,
conversations.
like there's a connection for sure.
Can you talk about a moment where it felt like, oh wow, this is really a powerful setup
Hmm.
compared to kind of the traditional single studio whatever.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, work from home transition, like that
Mm,
was, that would have been, I mean, that has been a nightmare for everybody, right? Like trying to figure out how to
sure.
do that out of nowhere, logistically is just super challenging. And so having a whole organization set up to focus on that, right? Like they got to set up machines, like they got their network security set up. They did all this stuff before everybody was even thinking about it. We are all thinking about our families and stuff, right? Like, and
Yeah.
so that's awesome that we can actually do that. With the reliance on that core. Yeah.
Cool, cool. And just like that, it's been what, like 3 years you've been over there?
Yeah, which is longer work from home than it was in person, which is pretty wild. Yeah.
Crazy. Crazy.
Yeah.
How has been the growth of the team throughout
hmm
that time? Like you said, you probably grown more than the size it was when you were there.
Yeah. Yeah. Our team's grown. We're about a little over 100 now. Trying to figure out what our target's going to be, trying to figure out what that means for, our capabilities. Like we're trying to figure out our game basically, right? Like I
Mhm.
can't say much, but we're kind of multiplayer games. So, it's like trying to figure that out for the first time as a studio, while we're building a team, while we're learning how to work from home, while we're making a new IP and all this kind of stuff, right? It's pretty wild.
Indeed, indeed. There are
Yeah.
people that you would ask to say, "Hey, man, if I could do it differently, I would have only
hmm
bit off one or two of those things, as opposed to
Yeah.
all of them
There's a
at the
lot,
same time
and we didn't get
simultaneously."
a choice, right? We got a lot of that.
Yeah.
Just everybody did too. So, but it's
Mhm.
been interesting. Like I think for myself, like going again from when I got here, you know, 10, 15 people trying to make a thing, just prototyping stuff really quickly. Now like over 100, trying to figure out our team shape, how we communicate, how we build stuff. So that's been a huge journey, especially for me, just learning how to be more of a leader than I've ever been before.
Yeah.
Figuring out like where I can step in and where I shouldn't. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah, like I've been thinking a lot about like, yeah, keep using sports, but I'll use it again. Uh,
I love sports analogies,
yeah,
friends.
like I think a lot about like a coach and how a good lead is kind of like a good coach in the sense of, a coach isn't out on the field like doing the work. Like he's not the one like run the plays, he's not the one like run the fast breaks or whatever, right? Like he's the one looking at the bigger picture, sort of thinking about what everybody can be doing differently, to sort of get towards the goal a little bit better. And so he understands that, they understand the capabilities of each member of their team. They understand the strengths, the weaknesses, but they're looking at the bigger picture and helping them guide their work to meet that, vision.
Mhm.
And so a lot of that translates down to like, I used to be down, like I said, in the weeds, thinking about like how everything fits together, how I'm gonna do like how I'm gonna tune this grenade or how I'm gonna tune this weapon or whatever. And now I still think about that, but I'm thinking about like the person doing that work and how what's gonna motivate them. Like what are they concerned about?
Yeah.
Like what are they interested in, right? And um, so again, bigger picture, trying to figure that out for myself because it's a growing pattern for sure. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Curious about any mechanisms that you found or adopted that work
hmm
well in terms of learning the people on your team, their talents, the
hmm
way they like to work, and then
Yeah.
latching on and being like, "Okay, this works with you, but not with this other person," right?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff that like is top of mind for me, I guess, in this regard is like there's a lot of sensibilities that like everybody has their own sensibilities, and so like
Mhm.
trying to create a culture and an environment where it feels like you can bring that to the table is most important. So really, it's just about like I said earlier, like comfort. Um, and so
Yeah.
we're trying to like break down the walls anytime it feels like something is attacking you personally. If that makes sense, because that kind of helps people feel more comfortable.
Word, right? That becomes more of like a, I don't know, man, fight or flight response triggering thing, right? Like, hold on,
Yeah,
we're not even talking about work. I
yeah,
gotta like defend my honor or been
yeah.
disrespected or something.
It's
Yeah.
hard, especially like if you're like alone coming to a new studio, you don't know anybody. Like everything kind of feels like it could be held against you sometimes. And so we want to like break down those walls first. Like that's kind of one thing I've picked up from both Bungie and Firewalk time. And so that kind of translates down to like um, having a culture of understanding people of who they are, not just what the work they do. So
Okay.
talking about games, talking about what people are into, their families, all like just kind of like trying to be a little bit more connected about like understanding someone's personal ambitions, who they are, and bringing
Mhm.
that forefront a little more and sharing that yourself as well. So not forcing that out of people. Kind of like setting a standard of like, hey, look, we all kind of talk about this. We're all a little bit vulnerable. Like none of us, have made this game before. Like let's like, you know what I
Word.
mean? Like let's try and like take down those walls. And so that's just a lot of like group ups and stuff. The other thing that translates to is like the way we talk about our content. And so at Bungie, we had this really good habit of like, getting together as a design group, and in the case that I was in, it was like within the sandbox team or the gameplay team. We'd get together every week, multiple times a week sometimes, but like really just like, let's just talk about what problems we're all working on. And someone would share like, okay, I'm working on this. I can't figure this out, or like I'm stuck here, or like here's an idea I have. I'm kind of run by people, and that was everybody. And so including the leads, including the people who were there for a while. And so that exposes some vulnerability of like, if you see someone who's been doing it for a while, talk about things that are hard for them, or bringing stories to the table of like, oh, this reminds me of this other time that was hard for me or whatever, right? That starts to like create a little bit of a space, and then I think still like trying to create the expectation that it's not all on one person, it's a team effort. And so if you are stuck, it's not like a reflection of your own problems or ego or anything like that. It's just like, how do we all get past this? Because this is all our game, right? Like, like this is your section, this is my section. So yeah, I mean that again, like just and that sort of connects back to thinking about the whole person of like, is this something that motivates the person? Should they be working on this? Like, is this something that like, are they, is their sort of brain sort of more lends itself to this other type of problem? Like, can we move people around? Can we help other people out this way? Like, I just think, I think about the whole picture. Even sometimes changing the design of the game to meet the sort of strengths of the team you have.
Interesting. I guess you guys, that's a luxury you have because of the area you're in, with kind of defining something from the ground
scratch,
up and exploring.
Yeah, you get some opportunities to do that. It's definitely a hard lever to pull, but like it's something that I think can be a superpower, right? If you like, if you can really identify a strength of your team or a person that's working on a thing and adjust its needs and its goals for them, then they can just do more of who they are and bring that to the table. And then I feel like the more you can bring yourself into the game, the more it feels like a unique thing.
Totally.
We're all unique people, right? So
totally. Yeah. Like that's a huge thing to leverage your personnel, is not everybody, not your team doesn't exist anywhere else. And if you make it a product that is built off the strengths of that team, that's a huge competitive edge, right? Like to put a dumb example around it, right? If you have a team of people who are really sharp at, I don't know, super high fidelity, ultra realistic type setups, and you're trying to make like a very kind of loosey, cartoony Nintendo Switch game, right? You're not really using them as effectively as you can.
Yeah, and I think that's a big example of like a big sort of directional shift of the game. I think it comes down to little stuff too, like the example for me or the cases for me are when it really comes down to the way you give feedback. Actually, for me at least, like it's easy to fall into the trap of looking at someone's work, seeing them, in a position where they're looking for how to get to the next step, or they're stuck, or it's not working well, and see a vision of how you could imagine it coming together and give feedback towards that, as opposed to understanding more of what their ambitions are and helping them get to that. It's a super subtle difference, right? It's like if you're playing a board game and you're like it's like, oh, I wish it was like, I'm playing a resource game where it's like I'm doing this and that. It's like, I wish there was more action in this game. Like, and then these cards would feel more interesting because I could do X, Y, and Z. But it's like, that's not the game you're playing. Like, if it's a resource game, like, how do you make it more interesting in the ways that it was supposed to be interesting? And I think like sometimes understanding that difference helps somebody along the things that, already came from who they are, because their vision comes from who they are. So it's subtle, but again, I think it's shown up for me in a bunch of cases of like, pausing a little bit before I say something, thinking like, that's how I would make this. What are they trying to make? What are they trying to accomplish? Like, how do I help them get to that vision? It's super tricky, super subtle, but that's something I've been growing towards as well.
Yeah, I could really definitely hear the experience and growth coming through there, where you are stepping away from the way you want to see things or solved, or the way you would approach a solution, and taking a step back, recognizing that, right? And then thinking about it, processing it, and then creating an opportunity to give your reports or your teammate the floor to bring something to the table, right? And then kind of gelling on that. Because as designers, right, we're always we're used to constraints. I think we love constraints. We seek them out ravenously to be like, what world, what genre, what console, how many players, whatever. And it's really cool to continue using those muscles for the betterment of the project in a lot of different ways, right? To be like, this type of game, but this person wants to bring an action element to a game that doesn't really have it this way. How can we kind of morph?
Yeah, and like I said, it's hard. There's not always an opportunity, but I just think even thinking about that changes your relationship with somebody, right? Like, and that's like one of my buddies says it all the time. Like, relationships make games, and so it's really important, right, to just be thinking about who someone is that you're working with, not just the work they're doing. Just like in that sports metaphor, right? It's like, or analogy, or whatever. Like, if your team's a bunch of big dudes in basketball, like, you should not be running plays that keep the outside safe. So it's like, what are you doing? Like, get in there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, man. Shouldn't make them all shoot threes, right? You got to get down,
like, work with what you got.
Block.
Yeah, it's been a good time there. Like I said, I can't talk too much about what we're working on, but we're trying to figure out how to both make a statement about what our company is, what our values are, what the size of this game is going to be, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting to be a part of this from the ground up.
I hear you talking about building a culture and making it a place that's welcoming to people to be open and say things, right?
Yeah.
This is the point you made me think about. Was I remember when I started, it was like, oh, I just want to work on, a God of War or a GTA or something like that, right? And it didn't matter where it was, what I had to do. That's all I cared about. Or a Street Fighter or a Batman or something like that. And then as you go on and you do this long enough, then it becomes more about the people you're building the game with, and the type of game you're building doesn't really matter that much, right? It's just the chance to kind of bring it to light with this specific group of individuals, right?
Yeah. Two things I'll say there is, like, building culture has been really interesting, again, from the ground up, like thinking about what affects culture. And so we some things, like, we play test the game every day, like sometimes twice a day for an hour a piece. And so we try and get this place where we're always talking about the game, trying to talk with the nuance, trying to show, like, hey, this is what we think about. On the people level, it's, when it comes to hiring, like, we try to mix up all the different interviewers. So it's showing, like, hey, this is the breadth of our team's diversity as much as we can show. We don't only talk about the game, we talk about culture, talk about, like, hey, like, what are, like, things that you value from different places you've been at, trying to understand the person at their whole level. When it comes to recruiting, like, we try and look as many places as possible. We try to make sure that we're talking to recruiting if we're not meeting our needs. And so, like, what can we do to kind of change that up? Reaching out to different groups and stuff like that. Game Dev Scholar being one of them. And then I think it just comes down to, like, being really hard about the lines. And so if people cross the line, if someone says something in the playtest, it's not okay, call it out right away. Make sure our leads are the ones, like, setting the example and calling those things out, so people don't feel like they have to do that from the bottom up, but they can, right? Like, it's just trying to protect that culture over time. Is, like, you have to be vigilant about it the entire time.
Yeah.
And when it comes to making hard decisions, you have to do it. It's really hard. Like, we've had multiple cases of, like, problems coming up with someone, or someone saying something they shouldn't say. You just have to have no tolerance. And it's really hard when it's a small team and everybody has an impact, and you have to let go of somebody for doing something that they shouldn't have done, or saying something that, like, implies that they can't, be around someone else, and that's not okay. Like, how to do that. And it's been really impressive to be a part of a thing where we've decided to do that. It kind of, like, puts your money where your mouth is when it comes to saying we're people first. Like, we have to do that. We have to protect people.
That's crazy. Yeah, on a small team where every resource is huge, and the absence of a resource
can't lose somebody sometimes. But we did it.
Man. Yeah. You see that in some of these bigger places that have been around for many years, right? Like, I'll just say a Blizzard or something. Like that, right?
For sure.
And so you have people who are very senior, very powerful, kind of get away with things that you wouldn't normally be able to get away with, right? And you could make the claim that it is, hey, their value to the project or the company or the team is just that significant, right? And for you and the culture of Probably Monsters to be, hey, people come first over the business and the product. That's a big difference and hard to deliver on.
We can't let people feel like they're not safe, right? And so if anything is harming someone's perception of their safety, it's a big deal. And it's, like I said, it's happened a couple times where we had to, like, make a decision, and they've done it. And I think everyone's sort of, like, it's hard to even believe that sometimes, because
right.
I found myself like, do we really do it? Holy shit, like, we did it. And it's hard again because it impacts the team, so everybody's kind of feeling it, but it feels for the right reasons. So So it keeps you on your toes a little bit too as a team.
Now you're on a smaller team,
Mhm.
more agile, more kind of blue sky opportunity, getting to define culture, define standards and practices. Coming from Bungie for the time
Mhm.
you were there, and such a large team, and a huge franchise, and you could argue, right, Destiny being a new franchise, it was still kind of built by the people who built Halo, so you can
Mhm.
see a lot of the.
Yeah, a lot of the roots. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about your time at Bungie, right, and some of the differences that you experience now, and what it
Mhm.
was back then, and things you miss,
Yeah.
things you're happy have been able to change, or things that you purposefully like look to change, things like that.
Yeah, my journey there was interesting because I went there with the goal, sort of. I had a few goals. Like I was coming from Project Spark, where like I really loved the project. I put everything I could into it, and I felt like I was able to grow in so many areas. But I always felt like I couldn't push the quality in that sort of AAA sense as far as I was starting to learn. I was starting to understand. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was working on combat systems. I was working on core systems for progressions and stuff like that. And I was thinking a lot about these problems that I haven't thought about before, like how to make this melee feel really good, how to make the targeting for the melee feel really good, how to make performance on both sides of the interaction of the impact of that feel like they're super gratifying in a way that it's rewarding your skill, all the stuff. I was starting to think about it for the first time in a professional setting where I could go really deep, but I always felt like I could get to like 70-80% before we had to move on to the next thing. It was hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I was like starting to finally see the like opportunity to grow. Kind of like if you're like a painter or something, you're like starting to understand shading a little better while you're on one piece.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, and so I was starting to see that, and I just never felt like I had the time to get all the way there. And so when I was looking at Bungie, I was talking to people on the loop, I was picking up on this culture of design-driven quality, such that it wasn't just like it looks high fidelity. It was like this meets the expectations as a player. This is like super deep in a way that you can keep exploring and getting better at forever. And I just kept feeling that. And the people I was talking to in interviews and the test is insane. I spent forever on it.
Whoa, hold on. I took the Bungie test, man. What would this would probably have been like, I don't know, 2010 or something like that.
Mhm.
And I don't know, it was before I got to Rockstar. It was that
Mhm.
era of fun employment. I'm curious if it changed. I know of some other buddies that took it, but I'm curious
Yeah.
how it changed. I remember awesome design questions, like really
Mhm.
awesome design questions, and super open ended, right? To see like
Mhm.
your sensibilities and how you
Yep,
approach things.
super open-ended, yeah.
Build me a gun, right? Or, well, how about we go into
Yeah.
building a gun? Or like,
Mhm.
hey, kind of talk to like prefab or level layout.
Yep.
Just I remember having to write like an essay on like
Yeah, it's not
feel, right?
short.
Like game feel.
Not a short test, yeah.
Dude,
Yeah, I don't
and
know.
it,
I don't know how much it's changed throughout the years, but it's different per discipline too. So like, yeah, level design
okay,
or activity design all have different tests and stuff, which each
that's
department
true.
can kind of figure out. But there was some shared questions, and there was a shared sort of, I guess, look for criteria for quality of like
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to look for people who are really thinking about these problems. And again, like
Yeah,
when I was looking for that like extra 20-30%, and I saw these tests that implied that kind of like rigor, I was like, holy shit, like I
mm-hmm.
haven't even thought this deep. Let me think about this deep. Let me sit down and like really get into this because they're clearly putting this out there for me, right? Yeah, my wife was a girlfriend at the time. Like I was going crazy. She saw me like, yeah, I was like spending every hour I had at home working on it. Like I remember getting really close to being done and throwing it all away and so it's all trash. Like I'm not,
Oh shit!
it's like I was having such a hard time
Wow,
with that. Like it was tough and it was open ended. So I wanted to be able to like hit the bar and then go above, right?
absolutely.
But yeah, in terms of detail there, like when I was interviewing at some places before that, you get a design question that's like, what do you think of this game? Or like, how would you change this mechanic or something? And then it is interesting. It's definitely open-ended to have a conversation. The tests I was going through for Bungie was stuff like, stack rank every input on a controller. That was one of my favorite ones.
Oh wow!
Specifically for a first-person shooter. I was thinking about that. I was like, okay, how do I get there?
Just like every face button and every trigger, every
Everything
bumper.
on the controller. And like,
Holy shit!
I remember having a conversation about that in my job, but we never got a chance to get really into it. And so that was a good example of like, man, this is it. I can get like all the way into this as much as I want.
Yeah, you geek out to the
Yeah,
10th
super geek
degree.
out. Yeah, and that vibe, the geek out vibe is important, right? Because it felt like I am in a place that appreciates that, right? Like I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is me thinking too much about something. I didn't have to feel like that kind of fear was there. I could just thinking too
Yeah.
much was our job. It's like you're the designer. You're thinking about this too much. That's your job.
That's why we hired you.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was awesome. Yeah, so I went to the test. Loop was amazing. Met a lot of cool people. Definitely felt like it was a good place to grow.
Oh, you were already in Seattle at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, 'cause I was at Microsoft.
But like, had you been in the office before? To like the
So
Halo, the Bungie?
no, and so it was like, like I said, I'm a huge fanboy, so I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
this is it. I'm in the doors. Like, so I watched these products when I was in high school and college and all that stuff.
Yo, the
Yeah.
docs.
Yeah, man, that was
Word.
it. Like, just talking with people I worked with were in those Vidocs, which is nuts too.
You see the like you recognize the face.
Yeah,
And then you
like
match the name.
trying to like stay calm, like, oh yeah, whatever. And it's like in my head, I'm like, oh my god, oh my god.
Play it cool. Hell
Yeah.
yeah. Well
Which I still
done.
I still work with people from those Vidocs, and I'm still in awe because they're amazing people.
Seemed like a place that you learned a lot at, right?
Yeah, again, like it was ups and downs in terms of like what we were doing, how we were doing it, but in terms of what I've learned, strict up. Like I just feel like I grew 100-fold as a designer there. And to get into like how, because I feel like sometimes I want to like share not just like this is a neat experience, but like how I was able to like take the experience and get the most out of it, which I try to like share with even people in my job now. Like it's like I got there, and you want to observe, you want to listen, you want to learn as much as you can right away. I felt like so much pressure on myself to show show off and be like, I solved the problem no one else can solve. In reality, that wasn't as important as just learning. And so like, taking what you have and like really spending time understanding it. So like, for example, I got there and I was working on a couple of abilities. So I was looking at the tools, trying to figure out how the abilities worked. And I remember being overwhelmed by that. I wanted to ask questions, all this kind of stuff. And I spent time instead of sort of trying to figure out like, how am I going to make the thing that's super unique? And I'm super thankful that I had this realization. I was like, I just want to understand how they make anything. I want to understand like how deep does this legacy go? So I remember looking at all the tools and trying to ask questions about like everything, because it's really easy to like look at something and be like, oh, don't touch that. It's really complicated. And so a good example of that, this is actually in my game field talk, was the grenade trajectory stuff. Like how I was looking at like the bounces and I was like, what is all this crazy stuff? What are all these curves? What are all these like
what are all the curves?
Yeah, and I tried to take my best stab at understanding it on my own. I like read all the relationships I could detect. I was like, okay, this is looking at angle of incidence, and that data comes from this other file, and this file looks all this other stuff, and like, where does that come from? And I remember having a notebook or I drew out every like system and file that was looking at each other, and I was trying to like look at that at a high level and just like, what are these relationships? And then I would turn to somebody and ask a question eventually, and I would throw out everything I wrote because it was all wrong. You know what I mean? But I was trying.
Well, I want to take a step back on that one, because that's valuable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to reverse engineer something on your own, right? Because you're going to find things that you would never have found otherwise.
Yeah.
That you maybe can utilize or maybe understand something else about the game that you wouldn't have otherwise come across.
Yeah.
But depending on where you are in a production cycle, there's that other side to it, right? Is the
clock's
the
ticking.
value of the time you're spending. And if you're taking more than 10, 15 minutes on something, and you could ask someone else who can save you a significant amount of time, right? Like, is that worth it? Yeah.
That's the thing, man. I think that's the skill. Learning when to ask is a skill. I think everybody feels that pressure. Sometimes it's easy to feel embarrassed by that pressure of like, you're stuck in it and you're like, I can't figure it out. I'm such a loser. I gotta ask somebody, right? Like, it's super easy to feel that way. It's not a real thing. Tools are all bad.
Yeah. There's no awesome tools.
There's no perfect tool. Everybody's learning how to. Yeah. For different reasons.
If you got to build it, for sure, you get to build it from the ground up. It'd be 100 times better. We all feel that. We all believe that.
It's never real. So like everybody struggles with stuff. Like it's okay to get to ask questions, but it's good. Like you said, it is helpful to try to dig in. So I always feel like everybody's got to figure out their own ratio of like how much I spend digging in versus how much I ask, because it's different for each person. Asking respectfully with detail is helpful too, right? Of like, I need to know this specific thing, please help me. And not digging it with urgency, like trying to give somebody an opportunity to help you.
Yeah, I do like people coming to me with some amount of homework, right?
Yeah,
like hey, I looked at these, poked these, here's my debug, here's
even have
here's
theories.
a test.
Theories,
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and it just kind of shows someone like they spent the time. Maybe I should, share that time with them too.
Exactly.
And like I think one of the strengths that designers have to build eventually over time, like I think, is learning tools, right? Like, like I tell that to like college kids I talk to and stuff now is like, spend time jumping around all the different tool sets, even if it's not the one you're going to use, because learning how to jump into a new tool set and understand the relationships, understand patterns and stuff that's hard as fuck, and it never gets easier.
Yeah.
So spending
You're
time,
not really taught that. That's
yeah,
something you have to go put the time in yourself individually. And there's so many out there now, which is
yeah, and they're all
crazy.
different.
I would have
And
loved to have had that problem when I was
yeah,
coming up for sure.
yeah, I remember looking for it. Like I even used like Little Big Planet, and I used like the Dragon Age mod tool and stuff like that. I was
Oh
just
God.
trying different stuff because I wanted to think about choose the problems that were a little different between games and stuff, which is
Yeah.
cool because that's what I'm saying. It's like every game is going to be different. Every tool set's going to be made for that game, so you can't really master any given tool necessarily, especially if you're not like in it at one company or something. You're jumping around, you're trying to find your way in. Learning a bunch of
Hmm.
different tools is actually a really good skill. So yeah,
Hell
like I
yeah.
said, so I spent my time early on trying to dig into those tools, understand how they were able to make stuff with such expression, how they're able, like what they valued, right? Like, some tool sets are meant for like data table sort of queries, or some tool sets are set up for like
Hmm.
really specific frame data for like fighting games or whatever, right? Everything's different. And so like, some people
Yep.
put all that data on like animation. Some people do it all on like a spreadsheet. Some people like it just kind of shows you what the values of the companies are. So spending that time is helpful in that regard too.
Hmm.
Um, and it helps you ask more questions. So
More
yeah.
questions.
So that was
Yo.
one big area I kind of spent time on. And then the other one, just to kind of get more out of it, was like playtests and feedback was such a huge learning vector, more than I
At
ever
Bungie
expected.
specifically.
Yeah, more than I
Mm.
ever expected it to be. Like, cause prior, like I hadn't worked on a multiplayer game that you could play test every day and get like a holistic view of what the thing was.
Hmm.
And so that wasn't like a culture I was used to. And at Bungie and at Firewalk, we have daily play tests where everybody's playing, everybody's got their hands on the controller, everybody's talking about stuff on a mic or in the same room. And so you get to this place where you're playing so much that the nuance becomes the conversation. Whereas, like,
Ooh.
if you're playing the first time, it's big feedback. Like, man, I wish there was more abilities. Man, I wish there's more guns. Man, I wish there's more
Yeah.
enemies. Right?
The typical stuff.
Yeah, which is helpful actually, right? Because you want that
It
first
is.
fresh eyes perspective. But when you're playing 100 times, then you're talking about like, man, like the like rhythm of these attacks. If I go like boom, 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 the last one feels really rewarding, whereas in this other combo, it feels a little off, like rhythm wise, or like I wish it had matched this
Yeah.
other rhythm better. Or you're talking about these little like tiny things about like weapon recoil and the way you manage that, or like sight lines on a map or something, right? Like, and how
Hmm.
they come across at different angles, or like when you're in a certain fight or something, like you start to pick up on that. And then what I think is amazing is that if everyone's doing that at the same time, everyone's picking up on different nuances because they're all different people with
Yeah.
different eyes, and you're all talking out loud. You get to learn from one another too, right? And so like, you're maybe like, I remember I never worked on a multiplayer shooter before, and so I never thought about level design to the degree I heard people talk about it, right? And so I'm like in
Yeah.
the room, I'm giving notes on stuff I know, and people are talking about all the stuff around the way they make decisions around the maps, or the way things imply there's a room in a certain space when you walk into, like lighting wise, right? Or like
Yeah.
how many factors you have to consider when you walk into a room that are dangerous, call them threat vectors or whatever. I'm hearing that for the first time. I can ask questions like, "Oh, can you expand on that feedback?"
Word.
Maybe someone has an argument with them, whatever, right? And then you can hear two sides of it, and so the whole group gets more reps in thinking about the game from different perspectives too. So that was an incredible learning experience.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, I think the first time I got into that type of culture was I had to get to like Montreal, right? Like
Hmm.
you got to see that culture, and that's Ubisoft roots and things like that. One thing I had to learn was how to be vocal, right? Like
Hmm.
I usually I live in my head a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm playing the game and I'm just doing things,
Just
and I
doing
let
your
other
thing,
people
yeah.
talk,
Yeah.
and I'll bring up things here or there, or I'll just kind of
Yeah.
keep mashing into a wall to be like, hey, look at this.
Yeah.
But the more you do it and the better you get, the most valuable skill is, I guess, speaking your thoughts, right? Being
Yeah. Yeah.
super verbal about every little detail.
Agreed. And there's one more skill before that, which is like the skill of being sure of yourself to some degree. Like it's like,
Oh, okay.
dismissing your
Word.
own imposter syndrome. Because I think a lot of times, so say like you're in a flight test, you have these thoughts, you're like, you're doing your own thing, you're like thinking about something you're playing, and someone else says that note. And you're like, ah, man, I guess I wasn't crazy. Right? Like that moment where like you could have said it too.
Yeah.
It's just kind of, there's like these moments that validate that like these thoughts in your head you're not alone. And it's always worth saying them basically because there's likely someone else who feels that way. So we
Oh,
always
yeah.
said, like, for any given feedback note, even if it's the one person in the room, they're probably
Mhm.
representing, especially at the scale of Destiny and stuff, like they're probably representing 30, 40,000 people. So never feel
God.
like, oh, this was just some weird thing I did. So we always say that.
I definitely want to circle back to the point you
Mm-hmm.
made about the value of creating a culture
Yep.
where people are
Comfort.
not intimidated to
Mm,
speak up or are comfortable, right? That it
yeah.
becomes second nature, it becomes as natural as being like, yo, I need some water
Yeah.
or making a joke or laughing at
Agreed.
something, right?
Yeah, because that's what
Yeah.
lets that nuance come through is if you don't have to feel
Mhm.
like you have to go through a little mental gate, right? And so some of what contributes to that in that feedback culture specifically is this is my thing. I say it to myself at least, is like feedback is one directional. It's like someone says how they feel and that's it. You don't argue with that feedback. There's no challenging it. You can ask
Word.
questions to understand more of what they're describing, but like it's not a back and forth. And similarly, if you give feedback, you should not expect it to be a change that you're demanding, right? Or whatever. Like it's not like, oh, I gave this note that
Yeah.
when I play it, it could actually be different. It's you give feedback, trust the team, understand, and make the best decisions.
Hell yeah, dude. It sounds like something a therapist might have told me, man. It's like manage your expectations and you can't argue with someone's feelings. You can't
Yeah.
try to validate them or say they're right or wrong, right? You got to just hold it. Like
It's
listen
funny you
and
say it
hold it.
that way too, because that's I don't have any time these days. But if I ever have time to do another game devs of color talk or GDC talk or whatever, it'd be that like the things that I learned to be a better designer from therapy. And some of that
Word.
is kind of the way I process feedback, the way I even think about my own reactions to things I'm playing, and how do I express that in a way that isn't combative. It's just like the way I feel about something.
Yeah.
And so, like, a good example of that is like there's this framework for nonviolent communication called
Mm.
OFNER, which is acronyms: observation, feeling, need, request. And
Offner.
basic,
Okay.
yeah. So basically, it's like a little flow, right? You go through what you're trying to express in that manner of like, what am I observing? How does it make me feel? What does that make me feel like I need? And then formulate all that into a request. Singular. So like singular observation
Singular
leads
request.
into a singular request. And that's really important because it's easy to be like, this game sucks. I need it to be better. Make it better.
Yeah.
It's-
What I'm going to do with that?
or like this
Thanks.
big ass, enemies suck. There's not enough enemies, whatever. Like if you're really
It's
specific,
too hard. Yeah.
yeah, it helps. And that sort of like disarms anyone from feeling like you're attacking their person or their ego. It's just kind of
Hmm.
describing, here's what I saw and here's how it made me feel, right? And so, yeah, that I think that feedback kind of back and forth gets better when you don't have to be perfect about that format or any given format. I think it
Sure.
just works better when it's about the game and it's emotional feedback is valuable. Like if you're angry, like fuck, this game sucks. Like or I got this enemy is like really frustrating or whatever. Like that's valuable. But if you
Yes.
can also follow that through with like, okay, let me calm down for a second. I'm
Hmm.
working with the people making this. This isn't just the game I'm playing. We talk through how I got here, right?
It's still cool that we get to be that way, right? Like there's value to that, to being a
Mm-hmm.
normal gamer, as opposed to what I always remind designers or aspiring designers to be like, hey man, you got to develop your critical eye. You got to keep that
Mm-hmm.
notebook right next to you to write down
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
everything that you're feeling, you're running into, and be able to kind of critically dissect it and break it
Mm-hmm.
apart. Like, why did it feel bad? How would you improve it?
And value what you're writing down, right? Like, 'cause it's
Mm.
really easy to be like, this is obvious, but like it may not be, and even if it is, like it just means you're cluing into something real, right? So,
I
yeah,
like that. I like that. Don't undervalue something because you
hmm
perceive it as obvious or
yeah.
egregious. Yeah.
And again, like everybody represents somebody, and so it's important to just get that out. And then it's equally important to create an environment where it feels like okay to say something, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
What is one thing you miss about working at Bungie?
There's just a lot of people I really appreciate working with, actually. I mean, that's pretty much it.
The people.
I think that's everywhere, right? Like, when I think about First Playable, I think about Project Spark, I worked on Skylanders for a bit. It always comes down to people. Like, I even tell myself, like, I've worked on games now that have touched, like, millions of lives and, like,
Yeah.
big budget, all this kind of crazy stuff. But the thing when I think back to my favorite moments, it's always around in the pit with somebody working on something or, like, something coming
Hmm.
together that we all saw. So I think that's always what comes like even just as you said that, I was thinking through like my time there and it's just faces. It's like it's just like someone just touched faces, someone's laugh, someone's like, attitude when they brought something to the table or something I learned from someone else. It's always just
Yeah.
people, man. So
What's something you shipped, something that shipped that you had a hand in that you were like super proud of or just went through hell
mhm.
to get it out there?
top of mind. I mean, I've talked a lot about Destiny, so I'll say something about Spark real quick.
I'm happy to move over to Spark actually
Yeah,
because in this day and age of user generated content being all the rave, and I thought about this when I was coming into this, Claude, is
Mm-hmm.
how Microsoft tends to either be like super ahead of its time or super in the back catching up at the horrible time, right? When I look at Project Spark, man, I think they were super ahead of the curve there,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't. I don't know. I guess they bought Minecraft, and they're like, all right, we just need Minecraft. But I like Spark, man.
I'll never know the full business inside story of it. And yeah, like maybe it's too late, maybe it's too early. Who knows? Like, I think for me, it was probably the game that was like still closest to my heart, guys. And for anyone who doesn't totally know the whole picture, it's like
Yeah. What is Project Spark?
game made to make game. It's a game. It's no longer available. Unfortunately, it is a game about making games. So it was built off of the base of Codu, which was Microsoft's one of their first like make coding accessible by making like a really simple game really possible to script with like the structure of it was like you'd go into any object and you could give it instructions of when something happens, do something, and that was the basic scripting language even, but it was all represented with like big chunky friendly icons that looked like jump or punch or walk or whatever, right? Project Spark was expanding on that to make like even more games, even more expressive and all that kind of stuff. And the reason it was so close to my heart is because like by the time we started interacting with the community, by the time it was big enough and worked well enough that we could give it to people in like a beta form or whatever, like it changed people. It was so cool to be a part of it. Like you could see like there were people who really became game developers because of it.
Wow.
They had relationships, people who got married, people who like became like best friends. It was insane. It was so cool to be like that close and have that much of an impact from the work that you do on people's lives. And then, like I love making games because I love making things come alive. And I love making things that a group of people can see together and become real together, right? Like you have vision and you spend like, months or years or whatever putting it together to get there, that moment. And seeing people in our community do that, right? Of like, discussing ideas, sharing code, sharing art together, and just like figuring out how to get it together. Amazing experience. So the reason I'm super proud of it is because like a couple things. Like I was on the Brain team, which was the team like building all the stuff that you could use to build games, right? So I was thinking a lot about all games. I was thinking a lot about like what do you need in any game? What tools do you need? Like how do we make that simpler for someone to understand? Like what is the essence of a raycast? You know what I mean? Like it's like how do you put that in a simpler form?
So is that an example of a brain? Like it's like raycast. Like let me know what you collide with and when you collide with the thing.
A brain could be anything. Yeah, like a brain could be like a rock that says when the player touches it, explode, something like that. And so there's simple tiles like explode. Tiles were like the name of like each piece. And so there's simple tiles that could say like when touch or when explode, do explode or something. But they could break it down to say like when see, and that would do some similar kind of raycast stuff. Then you could go into that and get some options and stuff and see when see the player with a sword attack or something, right? So now you can like keep expanding it. If
so AI would like operate it the same way.
Anything could be AI.
Anything and
right? You could put a brain on anything, and so it could be as simple as when A do jump, or it could be as complicated as like when A figure out the distance between this and that and apply a force and do that. Like you could get pretty into it if you wanted to, right?
Okay, you like full access to all conditional.
Yeah, like we let you basically expand anything to get into like this place where you're almost writing just like regular code.
Wow.
You can do crazy stuff. So like, for example, like our E3 demo, my buddy.
Which year?
Man, 2013.
E3 Spark 2013.
In that demo, my buddy, so we built like this whole sequence of events, like a giant cutscene, a bunch of cool player abilities and stuff. But like the shining star of that thing was this mech that my buddy built. He's an engineer on the project. And it was a mech that was like, he wrote like IK into the way that the movement of the arms and legs actually performed when you moved around, so you could animate it and stuff. Like, and that was all with the actual tiles of the game. Like everything in that demo we built with the actual stuff in the game.
IK you could rig together with,
but he like wrote the logic for the IK. It wasn't like there was like a tile for like IK. He just did all this stuff. It's like,
okay, like a typical user couldn't do that.
I mean, technically you could, right? And so that was the thing that was amazing was like, you could, if you saw a project, like, because we could share them up to the cloud and stuff, you could look at them, play them. If you played something and you're like, man, that's a really cool Star Fox clone, right? Like, I really love Star Fox. How do I make Star Fox? You could download it, open it up, and then mess with anything inside of it. And so you could look at how they built the plane or how they built the pickups or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so again, it's a super cool community because everybody could share their logic, and it was something that even the games industry doesn't have, right? Of like, I made a thing that's really cool. Here is how it works. Learn from that. You don't have to copy it. You could start from that and change something, and then everybody got
Yeah.
better. So again, just seeing that momentum was really incredible. And I was literally part of that, right? I was like helping make all those pieces, looking at what people made, seeing what they needed. Yeah, pretty amazing project to be on.
It resonates deeply with me is that building block, right? Being the designer on the kind of the building blocks of the brains. Like, how do you bring fire from the mountains to these creators, right? To
Yeah.
go crazy with. And you told me that they would go crazy with like nesting things so many different layers deep and producing some crazy, insane logic.
Yeah, and like it started simple, right? Like someone would say, like, I want to make Zelda, and so they made a top-down camera with like rooms, and so when you went into a room, the camera would transition to another camera, and it was like crates and stuff that you could break, and then spawn like stuff, and they had inventory tools and stuff. It was like pretty simple, and someone would take that, copy it, start to change it, make another game that was a little bit more expressive, and that kept happening back and forth, like with tons of people, like thousands of people at once. And so you just keep seeing the like community evolve. And then they had a website, they start sharing libraries, right? Like it was nuts.
Okay, so I think
Man.
that's where some of these other things like Roblox or even what we were doing at Fortnite falls a little short. Is like there's a big part of letting people grab and open up and dissect projects, right? And like build off of them.
And the game industry doesn't have that. Like we don't get to share our final products and how that worked, right? Like we get GDC and stuff like that to kind of talk it through. But then, not every talk gets in the detail. And so it maybe not what you're interested in.
When that Matrix demo came out, right, showing off UE5, it was like, oh shit, cool, I can play it, but like I want to open it up. And then it took, I don't know how it took like twice the same amount of time just to clean it up and make it like parsable and readable by an outside world. But it's out there now, so there's value in that. But yeah, I can see the difference of like building something just to make it work, and then building something so that it's grokkable and digestible, and people could learn from it.
Cool was like they didn't have that limitation. They didn't care if it wasn't clean. They just shared their stuff. And then like internally, which is something I've never gotten to do again. This is something that we did as a studio, just like every milestone, we'd basically have a game jam day where we'd use the tools we've made to make games all day, like everybody offline from what you're doing and just make stuff. And that was really cool to see, like, just what we can make as devs using dev tools. And then we would share some of that stuff with the community.
Especially with your stuff, right? Like, hey, I built this thing, this is in the build now, and then seeing the craziness people could do with it.
And it gave disciplines an opportunity to play with other disciplines, of like an artist wanted to program, a programmer wanted to do some art. And then as a designer, like that wasn't our only day to make games. Like we'd often make games just to expand our tools and understand where bugs are even. I was like, junior to mid-level at the time. And so I was able to make games of all kinds of genres, like just trying stuff just to test things out. But then I was not just testing, I was thinking about like, okay, like what does make a good platformer? What does make a good brawler? What does make a good bullet hell? What does make a good adventure game? Like I was just trying all this different stuff, and I got to learn so much in such a short period of time that I didn't even think about at the time. Like I think back now, I like grew a lot there too because of that. Like it's just, so when I tell people who are trying to get in, like to go make a game, it doesn't have to be in Unreal. Like, it doesn't have to be in Unity. You can
You're gonna learn a ton no matter where
you're gonna learn. Just try stuff, and it helps you think about what other people are thinking about. Helps you think about things that like you wouldn't think you have to think about. You just got to make stuff.
Just make stuff. Yeah, totally. Because there's so much value in all the things we take for granted, right? Like, oh, the timing at the rate of which this moves so that it lines up when the player's here, or how do I detect that they collided or took damage or hit this trigger, right? Like that shit is universal. Figure out how it happens in one place, and then you can kind of go from there. Often, I have felt in a way that I wish the place I'm working at allowed for more game jams, right? I wish we had the culture that we can do a monthly thing or a weekly thing. And it's also when you're working in a game that is essentially an editor, that's part of the job, right? It's like, yo, you got to use your tools
and part of the job,
do things every week or every month that forces this.
I bring it up as something that I wish we had more of in the industry, because even before Spark, at first Playable, we also had game jams pretty regularly. It wasn't, we didn't make game development. They didn't make like tools, for making games. We just were developers, and every so often we'd have a morale event where we basically all game jammed. And so it was usually a day, sometimes a little bit longer or whatever, but it was like self-made teams people just trying stuff in Game Maker or whatever at the time, and like, and it was also great for the same reasons. Like, you get to try new stuff they never tried before. You get to bond with people, and it was such a good just team builder. And sometimes those games even turned to things that we were interested in for like long-term projects. That was never the goal, right? It was just like, just try stuff. It's fine. Just have fun.
Yeah. So before you migrated to the West Coast, you did your damnedest to check out all the places that existed in your home on the East Coast.
That's right.
And you actually got in on this bubble that was what, like Toys to Life kind of thing. And I thought that was a huge genre, man, that had like all the promise in the world at the time.
Yeah,
you were on, dude.
Yeah.
Because Disney, you know, once Disney tried to jump in, I was like, oh yeah, there's gonna be more here.
Yeah,
right? This is it, you know. And Skylanders was gigantic, bro. That was making so much money for Activision.
Yeah, I was so thrilled to be on that game. That game was the game that made me know I wanted to make combat and abilities forever.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up watching dumbass cartoons for way too long.
Like what? Like what?
like you know, 90s was all about like animals' attitude. So like, you know, Ninja Turtles, obviously, gargoyles, fucking street sharks, like all that stuff, man. Like I love
Street Sharks. There's the one with these like squirrel, chipmunk, bear ones too, man. They were like half cyborg.
Oh my god, yes, I'm blanking on the name. But then it's also Dino Riders. It's like all this dumbass shit. Like people just like
animals with attitude.
Yeah, people just like jammed ideas together, and it was just the best. And so on Skylanders, like I remember before they had names, like before the characters had names, like we just had the code names of what their fantasy were. So like you had like Rock Dragon or like Cyber Dragon or whatever, or like Ninja Lobster or some shit. And it was literally just like ridiculous fantasy kind of ideas just jammed together. And it was like we just kind of talked about what they do and just put that together. And it was amazing. It's just like super dope to just have a team kind of become children a little bit, pick ideas and kind of put things together. And it was also lucky. It was like, you know, so Toys for Bob was working on the primary Skylanders SKU, where Vicarious Visions, where I got to work, was working on the 3DS version. And so that was like releasing at the same time. But what we found was like they were making more of a top-down kind of Diablo style game, like no jumping, you know, just kind of like a lot of the abilities and timing and multiplayer and stuff. And ours was more refined to like action and platforming. So, and it was 3DS, so we couldn't do everything they were doing anyway. And so we kind of figured out what our strengths are going to be. And so it's like, we did have jumping, we had double jumping, we had all these air attacks. We had like, our combat was just different. I felt like it was a little bit more expressive even, just having that extra vector. And so like, basically I was on the team that was able to like, look at those high level fantasies of like Stealth Elf or whatever. And instead of just building the same exact thing they did on the console version, we got to figure out like, how do we translate the like fantasy, the core verbs of that character into something that makes sense for a platformer with this kind of different combat model. And so we did get to think at that ground level still of like, how do we bring this fantasy to life? I got super lucky because like I had no idea what they were working on. I just was like an intern and I got to jump on it, which is great. And, you know, I got to work on the core parts of the character. So I feel like I helped out with everything. You know, I was scripting stuff, I was putting together systems. And then the lead of characters, he gave me the opportunity to work on a couple just of my own. Which, you know, I look at that as like this big lift moment, confidence wise, of like someone trusting me with this thing. And I just felt like
as an intern.
Yeah, and I was like, you know, I earned that, you know, and like got to learn trying it. And I still feel like that was like the nudge to like, hey man, this is your thing. You can do
Own
this.
it, yeah. You know, go crazy with it.
Yeah, and it just gave me the nudge towards like believing in myself that I could build stuff like that I loved already helping with, right? So that game was amazing. And then like I remember it was early enough that like we didn't have, you know, all the final models on the toys, the physical toys. They're gray and
how was that? Did they give you kind of like paper designs or mock-ups? I was like, hey, it's gonna be this type of animal.
Yeah, it depends on like each character's like production time, right? And like so sometimes we'd get stuff that was more done. Sometimes we'd get stuff that was literally like a clay kind of thing and not done yet, but like the concept was there. And they were doing focus testing with kids. And so I remember like this like uncolored thing that looked like a dragon put in front of a kid with a game that says you can play that dragon. And they were losing their shit with the toy before they even played. I was like, this game's a big ton of money. This is insane. And then you get to put the toy in the fucking game and play it. Like it still blows my mind that was a thing. And I got to work on that.
It just screams printing money for sure.
Yeah.
I guess iPad wasn't out, and now that's kind of killed everything, I'm sure. But dude, even Lego got in on it, right? And that's another one that just makes so much sense, right? Like build the thing, spend the time to build the thing, and then put it in the
Yeah,
game, right? And
yeah,
like
yeah.
transform it, right? To do
People love
some
to
other
create,
thing.
man. Like, yeah. So there's one more part of it that I learned, a lesson that stuck with me too for my whole design career, which is like sometimes things feel really dire when you're making a game, especially.
Then don't end in sight.
Yeah, but it's like, you discover some problem that is just like you feel the eclipse show up and everybody's like, oh shit, what are we gonna fucking do?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
it. And I remember
Especially on DS, man.
yep, I was gonna say it was a hardware thing. Like because the promise of Skylanders is like you take any of your toys, put them on the pad, you play them, right? And DS did not have that kind of memory. And so it was like, what are we gonna do? We can't let you swap anybody in at any time.
Oh.
And I don't actually remember exactly how we got here, but I do remember that we discovered this other way of playing it, which was super interesting in a different way, which is basically like, what if you can't load anybody anytime? But what if when you start a level, you pick two? You have a squad, more or less, right?
Yeah.
You say, these are my dudes, and you load them up, and you see them together, and they're like little tag team buddies, basically. And so you jump into the level, and at any time at all, like mid-combo, you can press a button, swap. And so you swap heroes, you just boom, 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 boom. And so you can do that whenever you want. And it was an interesting way of adding depth to all the kits and all the stuff you could do. And it didn't feel like limitation all of a sudden. It felt like this was like part of the identity of the game. And I remember our game director at the time always talked about like, okay, if we do that, then we get more of that magic moment in the beginning where you pick your characters. So we make that this really memorable magic moment. And that became like a mantra we kept saying to ourselves, right? Figured out how to make that like this really interesting experience. 3DS had that like early AR kind of experience too.
Yeah.
With the camera. And so you'd put the character on the toy and you see it on the platform rather, and you'd see it on your camera on the 3DS, and then they jump into the game.
Oh.
it was fucking dope. It was way ahead of its time too. Yeah.
That's cool, man.
That's the game. Yeah. And so the lesson, like I said, is like sometimes these dire moments that feel like you're absolutely like just like drowning and fear and doubt and despair, and it feels like, well, I guess this is it. Like sometimes there's like a nugget of like twisting the constraints or thinking a little bit more carefully after just living in that dread for a little bit that lets you float back up. You're always going to flip back up.
Always going to flip back up. I like that.
Bungie had a value they called buoyancy, which is the same concept, right? It was like, you got to build that force in yourself of like, even when time's darkest, you're going to flip back up. It's going to be okay. Like, just keep thinking hard, you're going to figure this out, and you're going to flip back up to the surface. So that stuck with me.
I love that experience shining through, right? Is you've been in the trenches in the darkness long enough.
It's going to be all right.
Through the ebbs and flows. It's going to be all right. And in fact, recognize it, right? They were like, oh shit, we're in that moment. And we don't know how long it's going to take us to get out of it. But
and it's okay to be in that fear for a minute. It's okay. It's like real. You just gotta breathe, trust each other. Gonna get through it.
Breathe, yeah. You know you're gonna come out with something awesome on the
trust
other
yourself.
end.
Yeah.
Trust yourself. Hell yeah. We're almost at the kind of the origin, right?
We're going backwards, yeah.
Yeah, the place that you first got your break was first Playable. And feel free to talk about whatever, but I thought what was cool is the fact that you got to hone in on something that us as designers don't probably use as much as we should from our tool bag, right? And it's like the power of like paper designing. You know, we kind of are beheld to these wonderful 3D tools that we have and how fast it is to prototype something that we forget this other super useful medium that we have.
In college, I had a few classes where and I was in the game development program. I was at Rochester Institute of Technology, pretty dope.
Upstate?
Yeah, upstate New York. It was the early program. And we got a couple of reps that like doing paper prototypes for board games. And so I had some familiarity. And then in my first gig, like I said, that first Playable, we were working on kids' games. And one of our projects working with Disney is for Club Penguin. So I got to work on that
huge,
game.
Man.
Yeah, it was huge.
Club Penguin was huge.
And that game is all about mini games. It's a weird concept still to me.
It's like Roblox before Roblox kind of
a little bit, right? But it's like there's this weird thing I'll still never grok, which is like it's an island full of penguins. They just party all day. Like, I don't know where that came from, but it's stuck with people. So I'll never get it. But it was pretty. It was huge. So and the game is all about like I said, they party all day. So you walk around the island, you go to a different place, you play a thing with people. It's a mini game usually, and that's it. And so like when we were making our game, we were always pitching new mini games. So the cheap way of doing that was prototyping either through Game Maker. So we literally used Game Maker to make a bunch of really fast, rapid prototypes and send that over.
I thought it was Flash. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think at the time it was kind of back and forth between the two. Okay. And then we also did paper prototypes, depending on the complexity of the game, right? And so like I remember one project I was on, Disney wanted to see it. It was a paper prototype. And so what we did was we got like a kid to come in and play it. And so I was setting up the paper prototype with the other designer. We spent like forever, like we made cards out of little piece of paper. We like made rules. We had all this stuff. We had Legos representing the different pieces, and they were going to be all things that we could plan to put into 3D in the game, right? It made all the sense. We're like, this game is pretty fun. It's simple. We brought this kid in. I think he was like 5 or 6.
What's your audience? Okay, 5 or 6. Gotcha.
It was real, like I was not used to working with that audience yet. So in my head, I was like, this is dope. This is gonna be a sweet game. This kid's gonna love it. It makes all the sense in the world. Came in and immediately he was bored. Immediately. Didn't even hear what I had to say. I was playing with the Legos, jumping around, doing stuff. And it was such a valuable, humbling moment of like, you have to think like your players. You're not making this for yourself. It's a lot of the stuff I learned from games like that. And I think this still translates to adults. It's like,
of course,
feedback, like not just feedback, like, you know, I pressed the button and it told me what I did. It's like feedback as much as possible. Like if I do something, show that it has an impact. If I like move my hand or move my cursor on the DS, like something is always reacting. Something is always teaching you something constantly. And it just helps any level of brain development engage, right? Because you're like, that's how humans work. It's like you touch a rock, you feel its texture, it teaches you something, right? And so you're making decisions about that all of a sudden. And so like, if you have to set up all these rules first that are like abstract and there's not like a metaphor that someone's connecting to, and like, there's not like a constant source of feedback teaching them, it's going to be harder for them to engage and participate, right? And so that kid was like, I don't understand what you want me to participate with, but I see this toy, and if I move it in my head, there's a vision of what's happening. And so that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
As opposed to like, you didn't set up like, move this toy anywhere you want, and then the board will react to you, right? Like something like that. So I learned a whole bunch on those kind of games. Super humbling to work with little kids who do not hold back. They'll tell you it's garbage if it's garbage. They'll tell you they don't like it, they're bored. They do not hold back.
Talk about valuable timing to learn that, right? For that to be the first place that early in your career to learn that, that's super vital.
Super humbling.
A lot of us don't get there. Yeah, a lot of us don't get there till much later. So
and like, you know, working with your tester, like your feedback group in person with high reps, rare, super rare. I didn't realize it was rare at the time. I value that place so much. I learned a lot. Great people. One of the most diverse studios I've ever been at too. It's just great.
On top of that, huh?
Yep.
It's funny how, you know, some places that you start out at, you kind of see things, you take it for granted that, oh yeah, every place I work at is going to be the same way. It's like, nah, man.
Yep. I just didn't want to stay in upstate New York.
Yeah, you missed that snow, huh?
I do not miss that snow. A lot of struggles out there.
Man, yeah, I could imagine, you know, having like plan ahead for your meals and all that on the weekends.
Good times.
Dude,
great people there though.
Yeah. RIT. That is a one of those tech schools. And I feel like not that many were doing game dev at that time, so that's what makes it more special in that area. And what any memories you have going to school, going to the program? Like, did you know you were gonna go straight into games out of high school?
So the short story is I was a terrible high school student. I was one of those kids that was smart, but like didn't really engage, and so I didn't really I didn't plan very well, so I only applied to one place because it's the only place that I wanted to go. It was like,
oh shit,
because I went to visit RIT and I saw their games lab. It was like this early thing, and I had done some programming classes in high school that I did real well at, and I really enjoyed it. And I was like, if people program things, someone probably programs video games. And then I saw this program that did that. And so I got to visit it, and I was like, you know what? This is where I want to go. And thankfully I got in. So I went there, and then it was early programs, so like I think they were still learning a lot, and the teachers knew that, and it was good. It felt like, you know, shared kind of experience. It was frustrating a lot of times too, obviously, because it's new and it was hard. Like a lot of people dropped out and stuff. But what I really valued about it was, like that sort of humility from not having this be like a formal everything is done program. It's like they're kind of adapting as they go. And that's how games works, right? Like nobody's
that's a good point.
They become an expert. And the other part of it was the T-shaped aspect of teaching. So like T-shaped meaning like, you know, you touch all the different things, right? Like instead of just being one. Like they were definitely more heavy on programming because it was a CS, like computer science kind of built, you know, college. But when they started doing games, they taught everybody 2D animation, 3D animation, how models and rigs work, talked about the programming side for sure. A little bit on design side. Like I said, we did like paper prototypes or stuff. We talked about production. We talked about the different philosophies, stuff. Like it was just enough to kind of be aware. And at the time, I didn't master any of that stuff. I didn't even know I knew any of it until I was in my internship. People were talking about stuff, and I was like, oh, I know that word. I know how that works. I can appreciate what you're doing a little bit more than I would if I had no idea how rigging works, right? So that was really valuable. I tell people if they got an opportunity to touch every tool, just do it.
It's a great point. You know, no matter how you feel coming out of school, whatever type of student you are, eventually you find the thing that really clicks with you and then comes at you fast.
Yeah, because we had that, right? We had like, a lot of people came through it and they were programmers. That's, like I said, it's like the foundation of that college, but people came out material artists or, 3D artists or writers, whatever, like just people found their thing that they like. And then the last thing I really appreciated is like to graduate, you needed to have some amount of time doing co-ops, which are basically internships. So you'd have to find an internship, you'd have to find a gig in the game industry. And that was where you come back. Like people who came back the summer after or whatever, they're like gods. They're like, I learned all the stuff, man. I know how everything works. And we're really gods. They're genius, right? But they felt like it. Like all of a sudden, like the learning made sense. They were more motivated to come back and try something. Like I came back from mine feeling like I want to make something. I made it. I worked with some friends. We just made something. We just felt like more confident all of a sudden,
Dude,
so that was a huge piece. It's hard as all to get those internships. It's a rare thing in our industry. I think it's growing more,
these days.
Yeah, but even if you can't, just make something.
There's no excuse, man. Make something, share it online, jump in a community in the Discord, throw it on YouTube.
That now,
Man, just yesterday, this thing came across my lap where it was like some person brought in the Simpsons hit and run world into UE5 or whatever. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, and then when you're applying somewhere, right? Like whenever I get like a resume for a gameplay designer and like I'm looking at their stuff, like I'm trying to judge as best as I can from the experience, but as soon as I see a link, I click that shit right away. And if I see anything I can play, it's immediately seared into my brain. And if I can play it and it makes some sense, that's already major points. If it's fucking cool, even more, obviously. But like, even if they're just trying to do stuff, it shows that drive and it shows that they're trying to learn. I'll just say this is a tip. Sometimes when people will share, I did this too, like, here's my project, and not just a project, but here's the learning I had alongside of it. This is what I was trying to do. This is what I found. That stuff is amazing. It gives you insight into how they think. Which is all we need.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. That saves a bunch of time on the interview, right? Because that's a lot of those questions are the type of questions you would try to bring out in them. So going back to keeping that notebook, not only for when you're playing something, but when you're developing something.
You're right.
And even like a little blog, right? Like a little journal diary that maybe you won't share, but maybe you will. That's the type of shit we like to read.
For sure. Like, I had one that was like my buddy and I would take games we were playing and just write specs for features they had. That was one thing we shared. We were both like trying to come up
specs,
And then one I've seen recently that really blew my mind, and some of the other guys I work with, like there's someone who applied and she plays a ton of Overwatch, she loves it, and like had all this like analysis on her blog basically. And so like we were reading that and we're like, it's super interesting, like super smart about the stuff. And then she built like this tool that basically you could build weapons inside of it. And so it was like tunables for any weapon to have. And so it was like her kind of like breaking down Overwatch and kind of thinking about like, how would I make a weapon in this kind of game? And it's just an experiment. It was fucking dope. Like super huge boon to like being interested in that higher. So
yo, my friend, we're coming up on that time, and from one fighting game fan to another, I gotta invite you to the final round. Are you ready?
All right, bring it on.
I got
my super saved up. I'm ready. I'm ready.
Shit.
Pick up DP. Let's go. Let's go.
What's the last game that you finished, saw the credits roll?
It was probably an RPG. Oh, Cyberpunk, I guess. Is it really that far?
You finished Cyberpunk. Damn, that's
I finished it like twice. So I guess that's why I
You like that theme? You like that world? Or you just like CD Projekt Red stuff?
No, I love Cyberpunk. Yeah, the world. Like I play tabletop RPGs as well as some buddies, and we did a Cyberpunk campaign, and it was awesome. Or Shadowrun campaign, rather. That was awesome. So I'm always interested in that stuff. I can't believe that's the last one in my head. I'm playing through a couple different things now that I think I'll finish. So yeah.
What are you playing through? What's the last thing you touched?
I'm playing a Plague's Tale, which is
Okay.
I don't usually like the slower paced kind of stealth games, but this is a really good job of sort of keeping an element of it is different each encounter, and so I'm always
Okay.
engaged a little bit differently. So their pacing's really good, and they have the best rat tech in video games. Their rats are
Okay.
amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
Oh
So
man, that's saying a lot, man.
yeah,
So you're hitting on like the Dishonored and the Fears and stuff
yeah,
like that.
no,
I
it's the
gotta go
best rat
check this
tech
out.
in all video games.
I gotta check this out, man.
Yeah.
Talk stealth to me more. What's the last book you read?
I'm reading through Octavia Butler's books now. Specifically, I finished Wild Seed, so I'm in her. I think it's the Patternist series. The whole thing is called. I think it's 4 books, and so I usually don't actually read a ton of fiction. I've been just kind of getting back into it recently. I read a ton of comics, and then I usually read nonfiction.
Hell yeah.
And so it's kind of like weird for me to go in this in between, but it's been great. Like her stuff is mind blowingly just ahead of anything I've ever seen in sci-fi. And it's like it does this really good job of like creating an analog way of thinking about things that we have in our world that like gender identity comes up in that, but without sort of like talking about gender identity. It's sort of talking about the nature of like the psychological self almost, and then wrapping that up in a way that like you could interpret as something about gender identity. It's really interesting. It's fascinating, super good book. I think they're making a show out of it someday. So
Okay. I haven't asked this question and you answered it already. So I just want to make sure that we manifest it here. Is what other GDC or Game Devs of Color Expo talks would you give?
Yeah. So like I said, one I want to do for sure is how therapy makes me a better designer.
Hell yeah. I'm signed up already. I'll fund it, bro.
I definitely want to do a part 2 to Game Feel. I think there's a whole thing about controls I never got to talk about. Yeah, I think those are the 2 big ones right now. I mean, maybe there's something about the communication metaphor we talked about like earlier of like, good combat feels like good communication.
Oh yeah, because it's like you guys are saying a lot without really kind of saying anything. Yeah,
there's something there, and then there's something about melee combat and dance that I want to kind of expand on. Like there's a couple like connections between like what we appreciate about good dancing and like them in the matching of body control. The way we think about like melee combat, it's really interesting. Something there.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I don't know what your retirement plans are, but I would say you're probably at the midway point in your career, and so there's a lot of opportunity here to see those come to light. So I'm super excited to see those kind of come out.
I'm now not excited to think about being old. So
hitting halftime, we're about to start that third quarter, my friend.
That's the magic quarter, though.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Everything you already kind of got. You're like, all right, this is how we're gonna crush them on this end. If you have kind of a blank check, 2-year runway, whatever tool set, whatever talent pool you want to dig out of, what will you build?
I've thought about this a lot, man. Ever since I watched Black Panther, it changed. It like switched something inside of me as like I knew I have to do something that inspires me the way, or inspires other people the way this movie inspired me. I have to do something that feels true to who I am as in every way, right? As Asian American, as Black American, as person that grew up playing games, person who didn't have a lot of friends, and all this, like all that kind of stuff. I want to bring to the table with other people who are bringing that to the table. And so, like, I think it turns into basically, I want to totally build an environment one day that's like, a bunch of people who don't feel like they fit in terms of diversity, like bringing people to the table who can truly be themselves in a place and be safe and make something that is truly authentic to who they are. I think what that brings down to in like game sort of sense is like, it's funny because I don't have like a game I want to make as much as I have an environment I want to make where people can make whatever they want. But if it were the type of mechanics I would want to at least work on in that kind of environment, I think it would be like bringing the gameplay mastery stuff I've had to spend my time on and bringing that into narrative expression. So like bringing the way games are telling stories, it's a way more interactive way. Like my controls matter. The way I'm using my character and moving around and interacting and stuff like is less like fixed, and it's more like the way I can express myself actually shows up in the story. Super vague, I know, but I'm thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, man.
I want to tell more stories through gameplay, basically, and I want those stories to be like reflective of the people who they are in a way that we don't get to see. Like I want to see like Black and brown people tell stories. I want to see, Pacific Islanders bring their stories to the table that you never get to see. I want to see everybody come to the table and change things. Yeah.
That's wonderful, Claude. Absolutely, right? These are types of things that only you yourself can tell, and being able to bring other people together to create that platform. That's the type of shit I'm talking about.
Yeah. Someday, man, we're going to make it happen.
Someday. Hey, yeah. 3 dinner guests, dead or alive.
Oh, shit. That's hard. 3 dinner guests, dead or alive. Top of mind is just thinking about Black Panther. I'm thinking about Chadwick. Like,
oh man, yeah,
the dude inspired me, and him working through that pain to tell us something that really mattered to people. I would love to let him know how that mattered to me.
Great human.
Music's a big part of my life, but it's hard to pick an artist that I would want
to. Haven't even touched on music, man.
Yeah,
but I heard you mention dance and fighting, so that's exciting.
Yeah, I feel like it's gonna be hard to be on the same level in any given artist I'm thinking about, but like I would love to just understand more the way Kendrick thinks.
Word, man. His last album made me have to look up a bunch of shit for sure.
I had to sit down. I was listening to it, man. It's too much. And like what
a little notebook out and shit.
What his work has done to me, I guess, is thinking about how trying to create a lot of stuff high quality isn't just about having good ideas come from nowhere. He usually has some kind of structure or a story he's trying to tell that's really personal that then inspires the music, right? And so that's made me think a lot about my own creative stuff of like, what is going to drive the creativity. Like it can't just be like I'm sitting down and thinking like I thought of an idea that no one's ever thought of before. It's like what's going to inspire that? Where do I get that from? So that's been this fun.
Kendrick and Chadwick, that's already fantastic. And yourself, you got the music, you got the acting, you got the game development.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess like it would be someone who has found a way to reconcile with the struggle of living in this country, with finding peace with that. And so the reason I say that is like, I'm just thinking about people that inspire me and stuff. And like, this is going to sound really lame for a second, but I'll just say it. It's like,
floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah. My mom, she's like, Haitian, came over here when she was like in her 20s or whatever, like figured all this stuff out. Like, she has inspired me to this degree of like, when I think about like all the stuff that I'm facing with, and I ask her a question or think about something, or I'm just venting out loud in front of her, she has this like peace with living here and living and being that like I really admire. I'm not saying I want to go dinner with her because I've done that too many times, but like that pinnacle of like sort of like rest and sort of like okayness with like, hey, like, the world around me is whatever it is, but I'm here to just do my thing. Like just finding that kind of like peace of yourself. I guess another person that kind of like resonates with that is like, I guess I think about like athletes and stuff too. They kind of get there too because the whole world's on them, right? Everybody's eyes are on them. They're just thinking about like how they're going to be the best, how they're going to do the next best thing or whatever. So I don't know. I don't have a good third person there. Yeah, maybe let's leave the seat open.
Solid 2 with a great placeholder card.
There's somebody.
The third person.
Yeah. Leave a seat open. That's okay. Extra food doesn't hurt anybody.
Yeah, man. What's a good place for people to connect with you, see what you're up to? Ask questions.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. We can put the thing in the description. But at Claude Jerome. I don't do too much on there these days, but I'm there. If you want to reach out, I've had people reach out to me, ask questions and stuff. I'm always down to go on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. I want to get a blog up one of these days. But I'm that's where I'm at mostly. Yeah.
Sounds good, my friend. All right, last question. You already know. Who would you nominate to fall out of the play area?
One person I work with very closely now, who I feel is very lucky to have worked with. The name is Professor. Works with them back at Bungie as well.
Is it Professor?
Yeah, that's the name they go by right now. And like they inspire me in a bunch of different ways, like the sort of way they can thinking about design as one thing, but sort of the way they think about everything in terms of like, perspective of breaking down how they experience all things, like even watching boxing, like sort of thinking about like tarot cards we've walked through together and stuff too. Like I don't know, they're just a much more worldly lived person than I am. They bring that to the table as a designer, which is great. Damn. And then secondly, they have fibromyalgia and like that's this condition that like you could say holds someone back, but they're at the same time still extremely like not just productive but creative and like sort of I guess in that dinner conversation, like they've come to peace with that in a bunch of ways that seem really challenging, and I'm inspired by that, just working with them every day. So that'd be one person for sure. Yeah, I can give you their contact stuff. Yeah, very different perspective. Comes from the theater background, even.
Oh wow, okay, that helps set the ground for sure.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that nomination, Claude, man. This has been more than what I had hoped leading into it. Thanks for taking the time.
Yep.
Been looking forward to this one for a minute. Is there
Absolutely.
any last words you have for the audience out there?
Man, just make games, be cool. I don't know, be cool with each other. That's all I got.
That's it, bro.
Yeah.
Wisdom. It's nothing but wisdom.
Yeah.
Yo, Claude is awesome. Point, period, full stop. He's been around too. It looks like he's finally found a place that he can call home. You could have argued that maybe that would have been Bungie. But, when a bunch of people leave from your team to spin off and start a new home, it's always an enticing proposition that you have to listen to and check out if the opportunity comes your way. Sometimes you just want to start a new team with a new culture, because the sad thing is sometimes the place is too large and too set in their ways to really make the necessary change, that the clean slate approach might be the quickest way to get there and get where you envision for yourself and your team. Hearing Claude share his love of Project Spark and how that changed people's lives reminds me part of the reason that I'm here at Epic working on Unreal Editor for Fortnite. Also, when you're working on tools like that, it's astounding how much of the team doesn't dog food the tools they create. It shouldn't surprise me. We've all seen it at the game studios we work at, that we have developers that don't play the game that they're working on. Either way, I finally have a weekly recurring game jam on my team on Fortnite every Friday. And I'll confess with you all that my ratio is probably closer to 50-50, where I'm actually jamming versus using the no meeting time to catch up or get ahead on a deliverable. Point being, there's a ton of value in game jamming with your team, from exposing devs to other workflows, giving them a chance to grow and learn, pick up some new skills, reciprocate that into their role or development plans, and definitely learn things that you didn't even know possible or get valuable feedback and player and user notes. Where do you sit on that wall? Do you wish your team jammed together more? Is it something that you're trying to implement or had and did away with for whatever reason, or deadlines got in the way, or is there something else you offer in its place? Curious, let me know more. I've linked his Game Devs of Color Expo talk from YouTube in the show notes. I encourage you to check it out if you work in gameplay at all. I can easily see myself inviting him back onto the show in the future to talk more gameplay design and to hear what Firewalk is up to. On the next episode of Out of Play Area, we'll sit down with Jason Nobler, a senior software engineer at Lightning Gaming in Philly, Pennsylvania. Always good times when we get an engineer on here, let alone a fellow Full Sail alumni. Also, a fellow Red Dead Redemption outlaw, and a guy who has an awesome pragmatic demeanor in everything that he does, including working on his own open source Harmony game engine. That episode should debut in 2, but let's put a safe buffer of 3 weeks just to be safe. So please make sure to follow us so that you don't miss out on that episode. Thank you for listening, devs. If you found this episode informative, I simply ask that you pay a link forward to a developer or on your social media to help grow our listener base. If you are a game developer with a story that you think could help a fellow dev out, could have saved you time when you were younger, please go out to outofplayarea.com and click on the Calendly link at the top to meet up and talk about designing your episode. Please make sure to get approval from your manager or studio's PR or HR team beforehand. Out of Play Area, the game developers podcast, releases new episodes every other Monday on all the major players, including Spotify, Apple, and Google. Please make sure to follow us to see what developer falls out of the play area next time. I'm your host, John Diaz. Until next time, devs, stay strong, stay true, and stay dangerous.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff. Cabin crew, please take your seats. We are now about to enter the out-of-play area. Yeah. If you can't reach me, I apologize. Since we out of play, I never compromise. John D, NYC, know we got the vibe. Make sure you hit that follow when you hit subscribe. Out of Play Area Podcast. Out of Play Area Podcast. We out of play. It's just a little something for the game devs. Stay strong, stay true, and stay dangerous. Had to switch the styles for a challenge. Best thing out of Harlem since young Miles Morales. A new podcast comes to provide the balance with game dev veterans and rising talents. Out of play. Welcome to the Out of Play Area Podcast, a show by game devs for game devs. just the rim. Welcome to the out of play area. Let's go.